Russ Rogers here from the 17 Law Studio, and this is the third show devoted to communication. As I've shared in the past, 90% of couples want and need to improve their communication, and the other 10% are liars. Today, we're going to talk about why, when you talk to your spouse, sometimes they seem to get it, and sometimes they seem to be on another planet. You may be having a communication nightmare, or you just may want to tweak your marriage and in your marriage communication. And today we'll do just that. Also, perhaps your spouse won't communicate at all, so we'll address that today too. This is the third episode on communication. I'm super excited to share with you ideas that would change the way you're thinking when communicating with your spouse. Today, I will touch on an issue that's near and dear to everyone's heart, introduce a new concept to communication, and then I want to spend some time answering questions, some real life questions that some of you have asked me. And I think you'll find it interesting, and you'll see how all three of these shows are tied together. Before we jump in, please allow me to do a quick recap of the last two communication shows so we can help tie all this together. On the first show, we talked about that we're always communicating. You are communicating with your body language, your money, your time, and all your actions. If you tell me you love spending time with me and yet you never spend time with me, then I'll not believe that you want to spend time with me, because I believe your actions more so than I believe what I see. This means that people believe more what they see than what they hear. If I ask Tracy, "What's wrong?" and she says, "Nothing," her words say nothing. Her body language says, "Russ, you have messed up big time." If I say with a happy face, "You did a horrible job fixing the broken chair," you won't believe what I said. You'll believe what you see. People believe what they see more than what they hear, and this is huge in communication. We also discussed love languages. And remember, I don't pay attention to Tracy's love language or her love languages because I feel an obligation or guilt. I do it because I love her. I want what's best for her, and it's important to her, so it's important to me. I shared about all 5 love languages in detail, and they are receiving gifts, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, and physical touch. We later discussed about expectations. We discussed setting reasonable expectations, setting them early, and sticking to them. The quicker you set your expectations, the better life will be for your marriage. Make sure you set reasonable expectations, because you need to make sure you do what you say you are going to do, even if it's painful, inconvenient, or expensive. Be a person of character so that you always do what you say you're going to do, and everyone knows it. Sit down with your spouse and set expectations about your money, your time, your discipline with your children, screen time for the children, your sex life, vacation plans, and just about every other aspect of your life as a couple. And if you're having issues with one another, you can bank on it being related to unmet expectations. Well, this is the third show on communication, so be sure to go back and watch or listen to the other two, so all this will make so much more sense. Now I want to share what's near and dear to everyone's heart at some point in their marriage. You may deal with this from time to time, or you may live with this as the norm, but either way, it has to be hit head on. We've been talking about communication, but what if you live with someone who will not communicate at all? Well, first of all, we're always communicating something, so that's not even possible. I shared this with someone and they said, "Well, but Russ, my spouse won't talk to me at all. They just will clam up and not speak at all." And it was a bit awkward because their spouse was right there in the room with me. So with their permission, I was able to ask some hard questions. The end result was that they were clamming up because they were so self-focused and they were more worried about themselves than their spouse. This really was a pride issue. And if you're not willing to talk, in my opinion, you're selfish and you're communicating to your spouse. You think you're not communicating, but you are communicating to your spouse that your insecurities and feelings are more important than your spouse and your entire family. So the reality of it is, if you are a spouse that won't talk, you are communicating that you care more about you than your family. You may think, well, I've got all these issues and there's this one reason or another why I can't think of what to say. Well, those are just excuses, because if you need help, get help. Okay, if you're the spouse that is willing to talk, how do you deal with that? As in a spouse that's not willing to talk. It's like living with a single parent. In some aspects of it, it's more difficult than being a single parent, because at least you know where you stand when you're a single parent. So how do you deal with a spouse that won't discuss anything? Well, I'm sorry, but I don't really have the silver bullet for this. I'm mainly wanting to talk to the spouse who won't communicate at all, and let them know that they are destroying their family, both in the relationship with their spouse and the example they are setting with for their children. So what advice I can offer is that you pray for them, and with the hopes that either their heart and eyes will open up one day to see what they're doing and what they are missing. Also suggest that you not dwell on it, since there's not much you can do about it, and try to function with the expectations that you're living with someone who won't communicate. And at least this way, your expectations are set to reality, and your resentment will not grow. Lastly, if you have someone they will listen to, ask them to intervene as much as possible. Okay, let's move on to another form of communication. So please try to stay with me, because after I discuss this, I've got some real life stuff to share with you, and I'm positive that will make all the difference in the world. So here we go. You really need to know that most people receive and process information either visually, auditory, or kinesthetically. Some have variations of all three, while some have one that is considerably more dominant than the other. Specifically, visual processors comprise about 35% of the population, auditory processors, 25% of the population, kinesthetic processors, about 40%. If in all your circles of influence, including work, school, church, friends, and you only use talking, as in auditory, as a way of transferring information, 75% of them will not grasp most of the information. So in school, your teachers would ask you to take notes. Whether they realized it or not, they were in fact combining more than one way to process information. That's why those who took notes typically made better grades than those who didn't. Good speakers use stories to make their points. Whether or not they do it for entertainment factors, I don't know, but they're allowing the brain to access multiple areas to process the information. Stories cause the speech that they're giving to more effectively impact the audience by touching the auditory processors and the kinesthetic processors and the visual processors. Well, see, visual processors need to see it. Auditory processors need to hear it, and kinesthetic processors need to touch it or feel it. Now, believe me, this is going to make a lot more sense as I share a bit more, because you're probably thinking, what the heck does this have to do with my marriage? Stay tuned. If you're like me, I am a visual processor. I need to see it. If you tell me a bunch of information, like tell me, I may or may not process what you're saying. If you email it to me, then I'll not have an issue whatsoever. If Tracy tells me 10 things to get at the grocery store, I will mess it up. If she writes it down or texts it to me, I can look at it one time and get the entire list without seeing it again. I'm also a kinesthetic person, so I could take apart the lawnmower or the motorcycle, and I could put it back together without any notes whatsoever. If you tell me how to take apart the lawnmower or the motorcycle, we'll have hundreds of pieces left over, and neither will run ever again. When learning a new skill or new information, visual people may say something like this: I see what you're doing. Or auditory people may say, I hear what you're saying. And kinesthetic people, they may say, I feel what you're saying is correct. So as a broad generalization, you'll notice that visual people keep their hair neat, their clothes are matching, and they're always looking polished aesthetically. Similarly, the auditory person will demonstrate excellent language and communication skills, and kinesthetic processors are the hands-on people, often with excellent physical coordination, and they're wearing casual clothes, sandals, learning as they go. So let's pretend it's Christmas Eve, and 3 families bought a swing set for their children. They have one afternoon to build it. The visual people will look at the picture on the box and build it from there. The auditory people may have someone read the directions to them as they put it together. And the kinesthetic people will probably finish first because they are the hands-on processors. They are the people who will be sipping eggnog hours before the other two families get close to finishing. Hey, I get it. All this is interesting, but who cares? It's important to know how you and your spouse process information so you are not frustrating each other. You have already made adjustments to your spouse's processing skills, probably subconsciously, but in order to move forward, it's good to define it. For example, I'm visual. I do not appreciate reading out loud. You may think, well, that's a guy thing, and you'd probably partially be correct, but the majority of guys are visual. If Tracy insists on reading directions to me, that will drive me crazy because I'm not an auditory person at all. She might as well be burping the Star-Spangled Banner to me in Hebrew. She is auditory, so she reads directions. It's a big deal to her to read the directions or someone read them to her, or she'll read them out loud. If I stop her from reading the directions out loud, that drives her crazy. In light of this, we recognize in each other that we have made adjustments so that we can work on a project together and remain friends. Now, these tendencies influence so many other conversations. Tracy will ask me a question and I'll say, hey, I need to see it. Over time, we have learned how the other processes information so it benefits our communication. For example, in the past, she may have called and asked me if I wanted a certain dish for dinner. Maybe she had some specific dish in mind, and I'd respond, hey, whatever works for you works for me, right? That's what the guys do. And she's trying to make my day, but I seem not to care. However, in reality, unless I can see it, I don't even know what she's talking about. I don't know what I want for dinner. I guess food, right? Now, if she gave me choices that I could maybe picture in my mind, then I could process that. For example, she could say, hey, do you want that grilled chicken like I made a couple weeks ago? Or would you like to stop by Chick-fil-A on your way home? Oh, okay. I can make that decision. See, God made me visual, so if you allow me to see it, I can decide in a moment. Show me a color swatch to paint the living room, and I can make a quick decision. Call me and ask me if I would like it painted autumn taupe, and then I'm at a loss. So on the flip side, most women are auditory. If you probably heard that on average, women speak many times more words on a daily basis than men. This is partially because God made them auditory. So which is better? The answer is neither, or all three. They are what they are. God made us that way, and it's good that we understand that so that we'll know how to communicate with each other. They're all good. They're just different. Your wife probably wants to talk to you, which doesn't mean she wants you to fix something, while a visual or kinesthetic husband may think through something and then talk about it. And an auditory wife may want to talk about it as her method of thinking it through. A wife is merely talking for talking's sake, but a husband interprets that there is an issue that needs his kinesthetic brain to fix. So the auditory wife gets frustrated and said, you really never listen to me. And the kinesthetic husband is thinking, I was a good listener. In fact, I was such a good listener that I fixed it for you. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that she wanted you to listen. She didn't want the fix. Listening was the fix. You didn't do the one thing she needed. It's not that women can't be visual, men can't be auditory. It's just that most men are visual and most women are auditory. And if you don't know what you are, gamble that the husband is visual, the wife is auditory, and both probably have some kinesthetic traits. So for the women reading this, keep in mind that there are very few guys out there who are auditory. So if you tell them in something instead of showing them, the likelihood of the message getting across is low. If you've said or thought many times, I keep telling him, but he never listens. Well, he's probably not. So try another approach. To women, to say women are never visual wouldn't be true, but it's the main trait in most men. If most men are visual, then men really do care what their wife looks like and how they dress and their overall appearance. I know he may love you unconditionally, but it does matter. It does not mean that every wife has to have the perfect body or dress flawlessly, but in general, how a wife keeps herself does matter to most men. If you occasionally let down your hair or don't dress up, don't match, or don't put on some makeup, it's not a big deal. However, if it's a way of life for you to dress like a slob, then I bet it matters to him. Men, you think you get a pass for being able to do what you want to do and dress like you want, but in reality, women do have visual tendencies too. It does matter how you smell. If you think it's okay to dress like a slob as a way of life, you are wrong. You would be mistaken. So as you communicate with each other, keep this in mind. As you ask each other to accomplish something, keep these three things in mind. When you share information with your spouse and they don't respond like you intended, this may be the reason. I know all this is a bit complicated, but I hope you can put that to use in your own marriage and think about these things today. Okay. Now I want to move on to some more practical information that you could put to use now. So all this communication stuff is awesome, but how does it work in the real world? So in order for me to answer that, I want to answer a question that I get all the time, and it's around financing and budgeting. Most are asking me how to get on a budget because they can't seem to ever actually make it happen. They are typically struggling financially, and there is usually some animosity toward each other over money any given day. And you're probably thinking, what the heck? What does this have to do with communication? This is why I wanted to throw this in here, because I wanted you to connect the dots that this matters in every aspect of your life. Well, this may not seem like a communication question, but it really is. The world of your finances is a huge area where we need to learn to communicate or things can go south. So keep in mind, you are already communicating with your finances, and what you are communicating to each other and your children may or may not be healthy. If we can learn to communicate with our finances, we stand a much better chance of keeping the marriage on track. It's not that you need to communicate about your budget, but your budget communicates to both of you what is important to you. It's important that you guys decide what is important with your finances and do it together. So a while back, Tracy said, hey, I'd like to get whatever it is she wanted to get, and asked me what I thought. And I said, well, something along the lines of something stupid a husband would typically say that was negative, poorly worded, and of course, for very good reason, she didn't take it very well. Well, her response was, well, you got a new set of golf clubs. So what she really said was, I had communicated to her that my golf clubs were more important than what she wanted to purchase. That's just one small, silly little example of why it is so hugely important in a marriage that you have a budget, so you could communicate to each other what's important before you spend the money. This will save so many hard feelings. Keep in mind that you spend more time at work than you typically do with your spouse. So if you are going to spend that much time making money, it should be a big deal. Now, the budget topic comes up quite a bit. And as we work through this, I want to share with you up front that by not taking a few minutes to put together a budget, you are putting way too much stress on your marriage. Even if you are the blessed few who make a boatload of money, you still need a budget. All for mostly the same reasons. If you make a ton of money, you may not have financial issues, but the rest of this is true in that you are probably spending money in places that you really shouldn't or wouldn't if you were on top of your finances. Here's what I think. Most people generally do what they want to do. If they really wanted to watch a ball game, they will. If they really want to go hunting or fishing, they will. If they really want to clean out their closet, they will. If they really want to get on a budget, they will find a way to do it. The reason I've seen why people don't want to really get on a budget is for these reasons. They don't want to find out how bad shape they're really in. It's embarrassing. It's hard to look in the mirror and accept the fact that you've been stupid for way too long with your money. It's also depressing if you do the math and you look back and say, man, where would I be now if I'd started this 10 years ago? That's hard. And they also don't want accountability because this means that they will have to be disciplined and can't continue to do as they've done that got them into the position. It's like this. It's more fun gaining weight than losing it. It's more fun spending money any way you want to rather than having to watch your pennies. So I've worked with several people who generally can't seem to wrap their mind around how budget works. So I'm going to help with that today. And that's not unusual. So as I share about this, you have to realize that a long time ago I became a Dave Ramsey fan. So I may sound like him today. So I'll give him some credit up front. Now, I don't agree with 100% of everything Dave says, just like you won't agree with 100% of everything I say. However, I'm going to share the information from the 97% I do agree with Dave Ramsey on. First, what is a budget? And again, I don't want to get away from this. How you communicate with your money is a big deal, and we're on communication, and now I'm giving you specifics of how you're going to get there. So I don't want to lose track of where we are. So what's a budget? It's putting a name on a dollar you make. It's putting a name on every dollar you make. You decide where the money goes before it's deposited in your account. If you don't like your budget, it's your fault because you're the one creating it. If you don't like it, change it. In creating a budget, you need these principles to be where you draw the line in the sand and you won't cross. And here they are. Number one, you will not spend more money than you make, because that's probably what you're doing now. That's why we're at this point. You will increase your savings. You'll never regret that. You will decrease your debt. That's a must. Both of you need to be a part of the budget process, because this is not one spouse cramming down the throat of the other spouse. This is how we're going to spend money. That's not how it works. Once both of you agree it's in the budget, you don't ever have to ask the other spouse if you can spend the money. If it's in the budget, you already agreed that it was okay to spend the money. So anything in your budget that goes against those things and those principles should not be in your budget. So I'm going to go over them one more time. Number one, you will not spend more than you make. You will increase your savings. You will decrease your debt. Both of you have to be a part of the process. And once you agree, you don't have to talk about it anymore. You don't have to ask permission to spend money. It's already in the budget. Now, some people find out they can do this, and some find out they have to get a part-time job. I helped one family with their budget, and they didn't like what they saw, so he got a part-time job to close the gap. They're now debt-free and loving life. I also want to make it simple. If it's complicated, you'll not stick with it. I had someone who worked on their budget for 3 months and had this fancy spreadsheet. Man, they had a simple life, but a super complicated spreadsheet, and I assured them it was too complicated. In fact, it was so complicated I knew you wouldn't stick to it. This is all it has to have. Your income is deposited in your account at the top. Your expenses listed. Make sure that after your expenses are subtracted from your income, it should be zero. The reason it should be zero is because in my definition of a budget is putting a name on each dollar before you make it. And this means also your savings is a line item on your budget. Savings for your emergency fund is a line item. Savings for your vacation is a line item. I will probably devote an entire podcast to just budgeting and financing and marriage, but I didn't want to hit on the high spots since I get this a lot. So here's my quick observation. I've never visited with a family that had financial issues and those people were living on a budget. Never happened. Okay, that's enough today about communication. I hope you wrap your minds around how your spouse processes information, whether that's visually, auditory, or kinesthetically. Again, it's a big deal. Also, what are you communicating to your spouse and how you spend money? And before I go, I have to share that you need to go to the17laws.com, check out the Marriage Commitment Challenge coin. It's truly a game changer for your marriage. You can also pick up copies of my books, The 17 Laws of Marriage and The 17 Laws of Parenting. Be sure to sign up for my blog, and until then, remember that what I'm sharing with you isn't perfect, but I think I do a pretty good job of helping families.